Steve Gardner does a great job covering baseball for USA Today. Kind enough to join us on a Thursday on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, right here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Steve, how you doing, pal?
Good, Rich. How are you?
I'm doing well. A week into the season and a couple interesting storylines. I got to tell you, though, I'm curious what you guys were thinking. Kind of an inauspicious start, managerial debut for Gabe Kapler and some of the gaffes that he's had. I know it's not panic mode 5 games in, and it shouldn't be. I'm still going to give him 25 to 30 games. But, what's your sense? What's your feel here a week or two into the season with Kapler as manager of the Phillies and some of the moves or lack thereof, some moves he didn't make?
Well, the one I guess that stands out above all the rest, and is probably more egregious than anything else he's done by a magnitude of about 7 or 8, was not having a pitcher warm by the time he comes out to make a pitching change. And it seems like that should be manager 101. You should always be able to have that as a checkbox and know that you have somebody ready to come in if you come out to make a change. That said, some of the other things, pulling Aaron Nola on opening day, I kind of understand that because you're the first game of the season, your bullpen is all fresh. So go ahead and use those guys and don't overtax your number one pitcher on the first day of the season. But some of the other things, I don't know. It's just, I think it's a learning curve. And sometimes when moves don't turn out the way that you want them to, fans are awfully quick to criticize, even if sometimes you make the right move. If you're playing an outfielder in, like they did yesterday against Ahmed Rosario, trying to take away a little bleeder that comes out there and you get it hit over your head, those types of things, people are going to remember those because of the outcome, maybe more so than the process.
I'm curious if Arrieta is making that start on opening day. Do you think he gets pulled?
If he's had, Arrieta's a guy I think that you can give a little bit more leeway, and I think we will see when he starts on Sunday, he will get more of a leash than maybe Aaron Nola did. So probably not is what I would say. But again, with the bullpen fresh and everybody to go, I think that's not an indefensible move, to tell you the truth.
I guess, and maybe I am nitpicking with a couple things like Kingery was killing the ball in spring training, but then he's not in the lineup. Herrera wasn't in the lineup on opening day. Okay, I guess you can go either way there. There's this talk that he wants to get all the outfielders 500-plus at-bats. How is that manageable? How's he going to be able to do all this?
I'll tell you what, strategically, you can make a case for how he would be able to do that. I think that the real challenge now, especially with the way things have gone to start the season, is you've got to have the clubhouse in your corner. And if you're not playing guys that should be playing, or you've got to make choices that are going to make people uneasy, I think that's where the personal skills of a manager come in. And I don't really know. I'm not plugged into the Phillies clubhouse, but what Kapler needs to do if things aren't going especially well to start the season, he needs to be with those guys. He needs to talk to Odubel Herrera, before opening day and say, here's why you're not starting. Mm-hmm. And yes, I have confidence in you. And this is the circumstance. This is reason A, reason B, and explain it. I think that's the one thing. I know that from experience with Matt Williams, for instance, here in Washington, where he didn't tell some of the veterans when they weren't starting, and that caused a huge rift in the clubhouse.
I remember that.
I think that's what Kapler has to remember to at least guard against.
And it looks like the lineup is out: Hernandez, Santana, Kingery, Hoskins, Herrera, Franco, Alfaro, Pivetta, and Crawford for the Phils in their home opener against the Marlins. All right, you know what? Speaking of the Nats real quick, you just mentioned them, and then given looks like they're going to give a contract extension with their GM, Mike Rizzo. We've talked about this so many. After a while, I'm getting a little annoyed and tired of all these Bryce Harper stories. And I know not you guys, but listen, there's only one team that can, at the end of the day, really offer him $400 million. And there's no guarantee that the Yankees would even do that. And I just hear all these, you know what I'm saying? Like, you got the Dodgers out there possibly. I think at the end of the day, Washington pays him. That's what I believe.
It would not surprise me, especially now with Mike Rizzo. I think that was what was one of the big question marks in Washington with along with Bryce Harper's future is Mike Rizzo was in the final year of his deal too, and there was a question as to whether the long term, if they don't get to the playoffs, if they don't succeed and do well this year, was that going to be a mass exodus? Was Mike Rizzo going to take the fall this time instead of the manager? And I think by giving Rizzo the contract extension, now he can look at the situation and say, all right, I've got the security. Now let's look ahead a couple of years and see. I think what we may see, and we've seen a little bit of this already with, Charlie Blackmon signed an extension with the Rockies just yesterday. We're seeing players, it looks like to me from the outside, guys are worried about those big money deals in free agency because they saw what happened to Mike Moustakas, for instance, this offseason. And so the tendency might be, at least judging from what's happening recently, to sign guys to maybe a couple-year extensions, player options, team options, and things like that, to where you lock in some security because the players don't want to be caught out there and on a limb with nowhere to go and no team to pay them, and excuses being made about, we're up against the luxury tax. Harper is going to get paid regardless. Guys like that, Nolan Arenado, Clayton Kershaw, those guys are going to get paid regardless. But I think it still makes sense for teams to kind of take that uncertainty and use it to their advantage. As you could say that the Phillies did that a little bit with Scott Kingery too, locking him up for as long as they did. So it's those types of deals where the teams might have been on the hook for a huge sum of money. They're looking to control some costs and have some cost certainty, and that may be where we see Bryce Harper go rather than the $400 million free agent contract at the end of this year.
But two things on that, and I agree with the first part, but when I look at a guy like Kingery, we're obviously talking about a young player, a young prospect, right? A young player here as opposed to some of these other vets. And you brought up something really interesting. Okay, so case by case, every situation is different. So, everyone starts to talk about the word collusion, right? And I know a couple of years ago it kind of made its way into baseball, and then we saw what happened in the offseason. Is it more that some of these franchises are possibly leaning towards younger players, homegrown talent, so they don't have to pay him as much as opposed to just not wanting to pay that veteran the big dollars? I think they're leaning towards a little more of, okay, let's get some of these young guys up in here, and we don't have to worry about paying them. Like with the Yankees, with Didi's contract, with Judge, Stan's, that's a manageable contract as well. It's not like they're breaking the bank on these guys.
Right. Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that general managers and front offices are getting smarter now. They see some of the trends. Some of the studies that I've seen show that players, we think about the traditional aging curve to where players peak in their late 20s at 27 to 30. It seems like more and more players now are peaking at the beginning of their career almost, and if they can just kind of hold steady after that, that's a win. And I think that teams are seeing that. They're looking at the metrics and saying, okay, here's where we're getting the best players, and believe it or not, that's where they're the cheapest because we can control them for the first 6-7 years of their career. And so that's where the real value lies. And like you said, yeah, those younger players are gold. And and the occasional Shohei Ohtani who is on a minor, came on a minor league deal, right, and is not making much at all for the Angels. That's even more where you get a major league ready guy making such a small amount. I mean, that's huge for them. So I think that's the trend that we're seeing. Maybe not so much that they're shunning the veteran players as much as they are hoarding the younger players.
Again, Steve Gardner joining us from USA Today, covers baseball, does a great job. Good follow on Twitter as well, joining us on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. Speaking of Ohtani, how about the nice little start for him, right? I mean, what's he hitting? Well over 400 now.
Wow.
1-0 as a starter, a couple home runs, doing it both sides.
Yeah, and that's the guy that everybody was so excited about before he signed, and he was going through all that courtship phase. You've got a guy who's an elite pitcher. We saw that in his first start with the variety of pitches that he can throw, with the velocity, but also the hitter that did not appear in spring training, all of a sudden has blossomed now that the regular season has begun. The home runs, and what I think a lot of people didn't really notice about him in all the hype is he's got elite speed too. He runs about as fast as almost anybody in Major League Baseball right now. And so we haven't gotten the chance to see that displayed very much. But the power, the speed, that's why he was such a dangerous hitter in Japan, and why I think those skills are definitely going to translate over into the major leagues. That's what makes him such an intriguing and an exciting player.
I was talking a little bit about this during the opening monologue when we switch gears to baseball. Do you get the sense that we're going in the direction where there's not going to be starters that are really going to be built to go 7+ innings, 8+ innings? It just seems like, okay, if you go 4 2/3, if you go 5, that's good enough. I mean, I'm looking at guys like, I think it was Syndergaard the other day. I think it was Gray the other day. I know it's early on, but they're not even going 5 innings. And I've kind of seen that trend over the last year or so in baseball.
Well, it is. It's gotten to the point where, again, with the analytics, we've seen that just about every pitcher is less effective the third time through the batting order, and managers know that, and they also know that they've got a ton of really powerful arms there in the back and the bullpen, whether it's in the middle innings or the back of the bullpen. You've got guys that are throwing 95, and that's all they need to do is come in, throw an inning. And if you look at who's more effective, a guy coming out of the bullpen 95 for 1 inning, or a starter who's on his third time through the order, it seems pretty obvious most of the time. Now, you'll get your Corey Klubers and your Clayton Kershaws and guys like that can go deep into games, Max Scherzer, but those guys are becoming fewer and fewer. And if you can get 2 or 3 of those guys, talk about 200-inning pitchers, that used to be the standard for a regular starter. And last year, what do we have? Maybe 10, 15 tops who had anywhere close to that. So if you have 1 or 2 of those guys on your staff, you get those guys to go 7 innings, save your bullpen, and just hope that the bullpen can pick up for the other 3 starters.
What do you think of the job that Mickey Callaway has done so far with the pitching staff? I mean, he said all those goofy things during his introductory press conference, but it seems as though he's handled them. He's done I think he's done a good job early on. And you look at Harvey's start, his season debut, and listen, that's the best case scenario if you're a Mets fan, because he's pitching with confidence, healthy, looks good, focused on the hill. What do you think of the job that Callaway has done thus far?
Well, again, we're talking looking at outcomes rather than.
That's true. Exactly, that's true. Because if they were 1-5, we'd be killing them.
Right. But I think the main thing is Matt Harvey looks fairly healthy. Which we couldn't say the last couple of years. Steven Matz is out there on the mound, and Syndergaard looks fine. DeGrom looks great. So, yeah, at this point, you have to say the reviews are all positive, and he does have that track record of being able to, to work with a pitching staff, to maintain a pitching staff, and the accomplishments that he had in Cleveland certainly are obvious and were obvious when they made the hire. So I think so far you've got to be very, very happy if you're a Mets fan, just because the guy knows pitching, obviously, and that's where the Mets' success, it's where their strength is. And if they're going to do anything this year, that's where it's going to start from. Yeah,
and Cespedes starting to hit a little bit. Conforto back from the DL as well. So that's good signs for the Mets. How about Pittsburgh and their surprising start?
It's interesting. Of course, they did play the Tigers to start, and played the Twins, which a couple of American League teams. So we don't really know exactly how they'll fit into the NL Central right now. But the fact is, yes, they've gotten some good performances. They've been solid, and they have not had Andrew McCutchen there. They have not had Garrett Cole there. And they still have managed to put up some W's. So as much as there's some gloom and doom in places elsewhere, the Pirates, there was a lot of talk of bad things going on there. At least they put those aside for now with a nice start.
Yeah, and they have 14 games remaining, the Reds, the Marlins, the Phillies, and the Tigers. So you're right. I mean, it always helps when you have a soft schedule. Before I let you get out of here, we were talking a little bit about the Yankees yesterday. and the new book out by Brian Hock with the MLB Network, The Baby Bombers. And, of course, Stan gets booed 0 for 5 with the sombrero, golden sombrero, and then what does he do? He comes back last night, and everyone seemed to get a home run. I mean, is that, if that's the lineup, if we see that on a consistent basis, I mean, that's got to be a scary notion for the rest of the AL, especially the ALs and really baseball. It's not going to happen every night, Steve, but the bottom line is when you can get that hard of the lineup and those guys hitting the way they are, they're going to be a tough out.
Yeah, that's all three of the big guns there, Judge, Stanton, and Sanchez homered yesterday. And, none of them have been, it's been the best hitter on the team for the first part of the season. It's Didi Gregorius, who's even out hitting all of those guys. So you add him into the mix. And I think he's going to be a key for them because the loss of Greg Bird takes away a left-handed hitter to break up those righties. And if Didi can come in there and be that dangerous of a hitter in the middle of those big right-handed sluggers, teams are going to be even in worse shape than we may have thought earlier in the season.
Now,
this is going to be a fearsome Yankee lineup.
Yeah, and really in closing, I mean, how about the move that Cashman made a couple of years ago when they acquired Didi, right? Because there was a lot of thought, all right, is this guy getting it? Is he going to be able to be an everyday shortstop in the majors with the Diamondbacks? And then I think they traded. I think Shane Green was part of that trade as well, and Robbie Ray, and I think a prospect, I don't even know his name, but I mean, he's filling the shoes of the captain of number 2, and he's been a great Yankee since that acquisition.
I think the one thing about Gregorius is when he was acquired by the Yankees, he was a guy that was supposedly all glove, no bat. And when he was there, I think he came up through the Reds organization, went to the Diamondbacks, and it was just kind of, at least what it seemed like at the time, a stopgap between when they were going to get their shortstop of the future and Derek Jeter, and Didi was just going to slide in there, play good defense because the rest of the lineup could hit, and that would be fine. And now he's turned into, especially at the end of last year, in the playoffs, had a real good offensive showing, and he's still a very good defensive player, but the offense has just come around, and that is what has made him such an improved player and such a huge part of the Yankees now.
I couldn't agree more. All right, my friend, baseball is in full gear. Always appreciate a couple moments. Enjoy the games today and over the weekend, and we will certainly talk next week. Always appreciate the insight.
Sounds great, Rich.
All right,
we'll talk to you next
you
time.
got it. Be well. Steve Gardner on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.